Hey everybody, welcome back. Thinking Out Loud with Scott and Mark. And we're talking about APM, still talking about APM. And this little segment is going to be about APM within the context of cloud native environments. So we talk about Kubernetes and things like that. And it's not always meaning in the cloud, like the cloud is a place. It can also be on-prem, but the meaning is that it's cloud techniques, cloud technologies, containers, Kubernetes, Helm operators, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I think we would specifically want to focus on that run line. Kubernetes or OpenShift, pick your flavor, but particularly how Instana fits into that. And I think we should go into an example that you and I are both involved in. You know, we'll leave the customer nameless, but you know, we were able to come in and look. There were some challenges where they're looking at they're preparing for a UAT before they go through a go live, and there were some performance issues. And so we looked in there and we said, well, what do you have, right? What do you have available to look at? And what did they have? They had, well, it was AWS, it was Rosa, right? It was Rosa, which for anybody that's not in the know, that's the OpenShift that is managed by Red Hat on the AWS platform. It's a managed solution. And so they had AWS underneath that. And so what did they have? They had CloudWatch, right? They had Prometheus and Grafana by default in the runtime. And we had these performance issues. Maybe you can go into what those were, Mark, and in particular.
Yeah, I think without getting into the specific application, we have applications where you, as you examine them, you start to look at multiple layers, the infrastructure, in this case, containers and Kubernetes layer, and all the way up to the app and app components. And you have some things that are resistant to the obvious things. And what you were telling me as I was coming into the scenario was that the baseline tools, the team there was using baseline tools that were Prometheus, Grafana, things like that. Yeah. And when we added the APM tool, Instana in our case, when we added that on top, that's when we had this whole new filtered, curated world that told us what the application was actually doing. And that was the big aha. And the particular, yeah, in this case, what it did a good job of dissecting was you have a very long running user interaction. And the long running user interaction was a composite of many things that occur underneath. And many of us have worked in IT shops where they have these patterns like command query, resource segregation, CQRS, you have HADEOS, you have, obviously SOA, REST, composite calls, composite services. We've all seen this scenario where something that should have been 5,000 rows of a database returned was actually 5,000 separate API calls, once each for one row of the database, that kind of scenario. And that's the kind of thing that an investigative tool does really well. Whereas go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, it ended up being a transaction, right? Or a service that was called that in turn, like you said, pointed out ended up being more calls than it should be, and that added to the time. But what we started looking at the problem, you just weren't getting the answer from, like, let me share my screen real quick. So if we look at sort of what we're talking about, right? We started the problem with what they had, which was Prometheus with Grafana, right? And we were looking at the infrastructure. We weren't seeing it, right? There was plenty of memory. That wasn't the problem, right? The problem was transactional based with respect to an application, an endpoint, and a certain service that was, being called was not doing it in the most efficient way, and that was causing timeouts and just long calls of, what was a couple minutes or something when it should have been a fraction of that. And we weren't seeing that visibility within Prometheus and Grafana that was available for free in that Kubernetes environment, because what is that? That's based on Prometheus, that's based on monitoring. We're getting all this log scraping going on, and we're seeing the containers, we're seeing the pods going down to the namespace and the clusters and the performance, but you're not seeing this particular issue because it's not an issue with respect to lack of capacity, right? So we came through, we laid down Instana. Instana, what does it do? It adds these services and applications and makes that visibility across that stack. So we're seeing the full stack through that observability. We're seeing the complete call all the way down to the cluster level. And you weren't seeing the problem with the resources below. You were seeing the problem with the services that were being called in a certain way. And I think that visibility is what was lacking. And in this particular example, you know, this customer ended up buying into adding an APM solution, in this particular case Instana, because of that gap, right? They weren't, and then it also was a good timing because they were doing their UAT testing, and they were able to quickly see without hanging. I mean, that was the first question they had: is do we have to go through an instrument, all this stuff? Of course not. No, you know, this stuff will come in. You know, we'll lay it out. Those pods will get deployed. It'll start observing the environment and seeing all the endpoints that are out there and piecing together these relationships, right?
Yeah, now it's probably worthwhile, since this will go out in social media and YouTube or whatever, somebody's going to say, you guys are crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. I can make Prometheus and Grafana do everything. I can make it make me toast in the morning. And I'm sure that's true. So I don't want to try to say, when I say that we didn't see it, we couldn't see it, or maybe we couldn't instrument it, I'm not saying that we couldn't, or even that the client couldn't. But I'm going to quote a client who once told me that you could make a barn door fly if you apply enough thrust to it. But that doesn't mean you should. It doesn't mean it's a good use of your time and energy and resources. And so a lot of this comes down to being practical. Are you going to get what you need from Prometheus and Grafana from a practical perspective relative to your applications? I don't think so, actually. And that's kind of what we're proposing here, is that APMs still, they are in addition to Prometheus and Grafana. Like, you wouldn't, if you want that level of application intelligence and you want to reduce the amount of time that it takes to solve a problem, you're going to need to put an APM on top of.
Yeah, I mean, Instana actually is looking at the similar endpoints that Prometheus is, right? It's just going through and going a step further and looking also at the application level, you know, elements as well. Grafana as a dashboard actually supports as a data source, to your point, Instana. And the more we aggregate these data sources in Grafana, you'll actually get a great view, because you can open, you can split screen it, you know, and look at both. You can look at a raw Prometheus on a problem and open up Instana and start to look at that stack trace. So you're right, it's harder it's the level of effort you're willing to put in, right? How long did it take us to get that Instana stood up? I think it was all of 5 minutes. And within 15 minutes, we were looking at the transaction. All right, hit it again. Oh, I see it right here on the screen. It has a 1 second polling. We could immediately see that transaction, and it was just zero effort. Or let's,
yeah, it was just plenty fast. It was within the speed required to solve the problem.
Yep.